But then I think I probably said something as bad or worse when I was their age, so I have to give them a little bit of grace as well. Continuing on though, chapter 7, we are moving into a new part of the life of the people of Israel that Jesus is interacting with, and resetting and reorienting what the expectation will be. Before we jump in with reading, just a little bit of a reminder. We see Jesus interacting with several major feasts of the people of Israel to get them ready for the new feast, this true food that he is about to provide for Israel and for the world. So these major feasts that we have seen so far include in chapter 5, Jesus working with the Sabbath. Spell Sabbath. Chapter 6, we see Jesus interacting with the Passover. And now in chapter 7 through 10, we see Jesus interacting with the tabernacle. Otherwise known, you might have it in your translation as the Feast of Booths. So chapter 5, we heard Jesus in his interaction with the Sabbath. Chapter 6, we had Jesus interact with the Passover. And now in chapter 7, through 10, we're seeing Jesus interact with the Feast of Tabernacles. So, with that in mind, let's continue on. Could I get a volunteer to read 7:1 through 9, please?
After these things, Jesus was walking in Galilee, for he was unwilling to walk in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now the feast of the Jews, the feast of the booths, was near. Therefore his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go into Judea, so that your disciples also may see your work which you are doing. For no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself publicly to the world." For not even his brothers were believing in him. So Jesus said to them, "My time is not yet here, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because I bear witness about it, that its deeds are evil."
All right, thank you. So, what is this Feast of Booths? Well, it's a celebration of the Exodus. It's a celebration of the work of God and providing for them and being in the midst of them, abiding with them, if you will, throughout the Exodus. And so we see that this is a time of celebration, and it is a time of journeying, if you will, to have this recapitulation of the movement, again, from death into life, from the wilderness into the promised land. And we've already seen John allude to how Jesus fulfills the work of God in the Exodus. Because what's the thing that the people of Israel have in their midst to be the gathering place for everybody, especially for the presence of God and for the forgiveness of sins? He gives the tabernacle. And that includes the place where there is the Holy of Holies, that innermost sanctuary that is curtained off, that the high priest could only enter into one time a year on the Day of Atonement. But even preceding the tabernacle, God goes forth in the pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night, leading them along the way. And so this Feast of Booths is to celebrate the work of God and his physical presence in the midst of them in the tabernacle and in the Exodus as they are making their way to the promised land. And as I mentioned, we see Jesus Jesus be given a distinct connection to the tabernacle, the real presence of God in the midst of his people, in the very first chapter of John. Let's turn to John chapter 1 to see how John is having us think about the nature of Jesus and the nature of the tabernacle. And we're going to look at verse 1 through 4, and then we're going to look at verse 14. And be ready. I'm going to read verse 14, and it will more than likely be not very different, but you'll notice a difference than what you have in your text. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the Word became flesh, and tabernacled among us. And we have seen his glory. Glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So John in verse 14 there, I know it says dwelt. You might even see, I think there may even be a note on that. But that word there is actually tabernacle, the Greek word for tabernacle. Tabernacled among us. He is the embodiment of the presence of God as of from before. But what's the difference between Christ and his tabernacling versus the Lord's tabernacling in the book of Exodus? There was an inherent veil and separation from the glory of God in Exodus because we as humanity cannot handle that on our own. But in the person of Christ, we see the fullness of the glory of God face to face. We see the fullness of the presence of God, the full creative power and work that speaks all things into existence through his Word, in now the Word in the flesh, in the incarnation, Jesus coming down out of heaven and coming in the midst of his people. And so for us, you and I, that's why that important note is made to see and understand the nature of our relationship with God after Christ's death, because what happens? That veil in the temple is torn in two. The same veil that was there in the tabernacle that separated the Holy of Holies. In the Ark of the Covenant, and the mercy seat of God is now torn in two. And in Christ, we see the mercy seat of God on full display. We see the fullness of the glory and might and power of God on full display, but without that separation, because in Christ and in that forgiveness and new life that we have in him, we can see that fullness of glory without fear, without concern or sorrow, but rather in joy and in hope and with light and love leading the way, if you will. And this is where this idea of working with and reorienting what the tabernacle is for the people of Israel, what the presence of God is in the pilgrimage that is life on this side of glory, what that looks like and what it becomes, and where we find the true light that shines in the darkness, if you will. Any questions or comments on that? Just some other notes that we want to see at the text here. When they say that the Jews, I have a little note here, the Judeans, and I think this is actually an important thing to remember for the people of Israel. They were not always a united people. Immediately after the death of Solomon, so David's son, you see the people of Israel be split into two. The northern kingdom, which is the upper northernmost 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom, which is the southernmost 2 tribes, although one of the two, the tribe of Judah, is the largest and has Jerusalem. And so you see even to this day a distinction between north and south, where the people in the south, especially in and around Jerusalem, look down on those at the north. There was a reason why the question is asked, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Nazareth is up north, backwoods, backwards place. You know, they haven't received fiber yet. They're still working on the antenna transmission. You know, they haven't got a 4-lane highway. They may have one stoplight, but even then that doesn't work all the time. And so the people in Jerusalem who have high-speed fiber who, have giant 4-lane highways with the Buc-ee's right on the side, look up there and kind of wonder, what's going on up there? They can't get their act together. Well, that's why I think it's important to note the idea of the Judeans wanting to kill Jesus. Jesus is still in Israel, but he's up in the north, and he's been received better. The people in the south see the threat to their power and authority that he represents, and so they wish to kill him because they want to preserve the status quo. And that's where Jesus is sticking up around the north at this time and waiting until it is the right time to make his way to Jerusalem, when he will die according to plan, but according to the plan, and not through the devices and through the means that those who are vehemently opposed to him are looking to accomplish. And this is where, when we see brothers here, I think just a plain sense reading of verse 3, so his brother said to him, are Jesus brothers? In the familial sense, not just in the spiritual sense. And we know that they also are a mixed bag. Jesus' family doesn't always receive him well. But we do know that there are some family that do receive him, that do become members in faith. James is the clearest example of that. And so this is where some of his family, though, still mock him in verse 3. They tell him to go away, go south, and if you are who you say you are, well, we'll see. But this is where they accuse Jesus of being in secret rather than working in public. But for us, we know that that's just absurd. It doesn't get more public than Jesus performing a miracle in front of about 10,000 people. Which miracle was that? The feeding of the 5,000. But Pastor, you just said 10,000. Can't you do math? And the answer is yes. I cannot do math. But when we see the feeding of the 5,000, that's the 5,000 men. That doesn't include the counting of the women and children. So it's actually a fairly reasonable assumption to make that there were actually closer to 10,000 people there who were fed. And remember, when Jesus feeds them in chapter 6, he feeds them to the full and then some. How many baskets are left over? 12. And again, I like the symbolic interpretation of that in the sense that Jesus is overabundant in his provision to the point where all 12 tribes, the whole people of God, are fed more than full. I don't think it's a coincidence there are 12 baskets as Jesus is performing this miracle within the sight of the 12 tribes of Israel. And especially in light of the Passover, where they essentially had just enough to get them out of there and to, again, flee from darkness into light, from death into life. Now Jesus, instead of having them have a meal that is having them be ready to go, Jesus is now encouraging them to stay and to eat their fill and abide in his presence. And that's a part of this nature of the true food that Jesus provides. And so we see that Jesus is always working publicly. And so in verse 4, his brothers are deliberately, in this case, misrepresenting what is happening here. Jesus is not working in secret, not like the secret works that we see in other world religions, right? Where we see people like Joseph Smith receive these set of tablets that only he has, with this mysterious sort of looking glass that only he can use to translate the new and updated Word of God. That is a fundamentally private revelation and private work that has no public bearing. Whereas we see, for example, in 1 Corinthians 15, when Paul is talking about the nature of Jesus' resurrection from the dead, what does he do? He points to all of the physical witnesses, including 500 people at one time who saw him alive on the road to Emmaus, and says, if you don't believe me, you can ask these people. They were there. Some of them have died, but most are still alive. If you don't trust what I have to say, you can go talk to them, and here's a list of people that you can go to. And so it is a somewhat dishonest work, an accusation of his brothers, trying to make light of his work, and saying, well, you're just up here in Galilee, you're not really open to everybody. If you're truly open, you go to Jerusalem. And that's missing the whole point. And the greatest sign, the greatest miracle that Jesus will do, does happen in Jerusalem, with his death and with his resurrection from the dead. And so Jesus' response to them is that his time is not here. That's why he's not making his way to Jerusalem. That's why his greatest work and his greatest sign is not something that is happening now, but rather it is being revealed in its fullness on the cross on Good Friday, in the empty tomb on Easter. So he's not going down to the feast, not yet. And instead he remains in Galilee. Because just as a bit of a reminder, for all of these major feasts, part of the goal is to return to Jerusalem and to return to the temple, to offer sacrifices, to participate in the fullness of all of these different rights and things that were given in the Old Covenant, and then added to, certainly, over the ages. But Jesus is declining to go down there because, again, he has his time, his purpose, his will, and his way, and it is not yet for it to come to fruition. Any questions or comments on anything through verse 9? All right, well, let's continue on. Let's look at 10 through 13. But after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he also went up, not publicly, but in private. The Jews were looking for him at the feast and saying, "Where is he?" And there was much muttering about him among the people. Well, some said, "He is a good man." Others said, "No, he is leading people astray." Yet for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly of him. So, although Jesus always does his works publicly, he's not going to Jerusalem to the feast to do his work, the capital W work, so to speak. But rather he is going to see and observe, because one of the things that we know about Christ is he's just always out there talking and teaching and preaching and doing nothing else. No, he withdraws privately to pray. He withdraws, goes to the other side of the lake, as we saw in John chapter 6, to refresh, recharge, and renew. And we see that when he needs to work publicly, he'll work publicly. If he needs to work or move privately and see and observe and be ready to testify to what he is doing, he's ready to do so. But part of this, again, going privately, is because of the threat on his life. And as we see in verse 11, they were looking for at the feast. And not just looking for him because they want to ask him questions and become his friend. They wish to stone him. They wish to put him to death. And we're going to see that already in chapter 8 about how close they actually get to accomplishing that. But there are a lot of people who have received Jesus but have done so privately because they are afraid of what will happen if they show support, or even if they show an appetite for hearing and trying to understand what Jesus is saying. And this is where then the life for the people of Israel and for Christ starts to ratchet up a little bit. So as we continue on in verse 14 and following, about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began teaching. The Jews therefore marveled, saying, "How is it that this man is learning when he has never studied?" So Jesus answered them, "My teaching is not mine, but it is he who sent me. If anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether my teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own authority. The one who speaks on his own authority seeks his own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and in him there is no falsehood. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keep the law. Why do you seek to kill me?" The crowd answered, "You have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you?" Jesus answered them, I did one work, and you all marvel at it. Moses gave you circumcision, not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision, so that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well? Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. So what's Jesus kind of talking about here? Well, in the course of setting up all of these feasts, all of these rules and provisions of living, they've been so concerned from what it looks like on the outside that they forget about the attitude of the heart on the inside. That they forget about the fact that God made these things, especially when it comes to the Sabbath, not so that people can show how righteous they are, but so that the work and glory of God may be known, and that they may receive the benefits of that. And so Jesus, although he travels publicly, or privately, that is to say, he doesn't go through the gates in Jerusalem and have a trumpeter go before him and say, "Hey, I'm here, everybody, come look at me." Rather, he makes his way, and then once he gets to the temple, then he begins to speak openly. Again, he is teaching not in some hidden corner, because the temple doesn't really have that, but in the midst of all the people, and that's where they're asking, how is it that this man teaches even though he has never been taught? Well, what do they mean by that? Is Jesus a Pharisee? Is he a scribe? Is he a Sadducee? Is he a teacher of the law according to how they would define it? No. He is what? What's Jesus' occupation?
Bumpkin.
Yeah. Redneck, if you will. He's a carpenter, right? That's what they know him. He's from Nazareth. He's not somebody who is from a cosmopolitan place who has knowledge and understanding, except for the fact that being the Word, he wrote the Word, so of course he's going to have great knowledge of what he is teaching. But Jesus' whole point, though, in this section is that he's not speaking of his own accord. And this is different than those who were trying to set boundaries on what happens on the Sabbath that come from their own accord and not from the will of God. What Jesus is speaking and doing is within the complete framework that God has given his people and does not go outside of that, but rather perfectly fulfills them. But what he does expose is that what they have been doing does go outside of that framework. That does come from their own understanding rather than from what God has given to them. And so this is where then in verse 20 they hear this and they accuse him of having a demon, which is their go-to accusation. So when Jesus drives a demon out and exorcises someone, they say, "Well, how did you do that? Do you have a demon?" And that's where Jesus has to respond, "Can Satan drive out Satan? A house divided cannot stand." So this isn't the only time where they have this accusation, but in some ways they know exactly what he is saying. He's getting to the heart of what their piety is, which is not true observance of God and his law, and again, not just the Ten Commandments, but receiving the whole story of salvation, being a people who are first and foremost ones who receive the grace of God through his saving work. And in the case of the Old Covenant, the way which God brought them out of Egypt and into the Promised Land, which God had delivered them from their enemies and given them life and hope and the looking ahead to the Messiah. They have stepped outside of that and then made it about themselves and their own understanding and their own will. And Jesus is calling them out on that. And this is where then in verse 24, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. So on the outside looking in, you have some people who look righteous, but on the inside, their hearts are turned away from God and his word. As opposed to people who from the outside look unrighteous, and in some ways are unrighteous. So John 4 is a great example of that. The woman at the well who has had multiple husbands, and the man she is with is not her husband, that doesn't look great by any standing in any part of the world's history, or at least of Israel's history. And yet, she also receives Jesus in faith and asks to receive the living water, not ironically or not accusingly, but in the fullness of faith. And Jesus tells exactly where she can find it, which is from himself, and the message of grace and salvation. And by all respects, and from what we can see, she did receive that living water inwardly. Right judgment on her is one of a person who has received Christ in faith. who has a clean heart, according to Psalm 51. Whereas these Pharisees and Sadducees and the scribes and teachers of the law, they look great on the outside, but on the inside they lack right judgment, because the judgment they lean on is not God's but their own. And this is exactly what Jesus is highlighting, and gets to the heart of things like the Feast of Tabernacles, which is all about God's leading the people in the wilderness and providing for all of their needs of body and soul. And instead they make it about themselves and their righteousness. And Jesus is exposing that. And this is where then the reception of Jesus becomes very frigid. And they double down on their seeking to arrest and to get rid of and to even kill Jesus before his time. Any final questions or comments on anything through verse 24 of John chapter 7? Yes.
It seems to me that the people, particularly the leaders, have created God in their image. They're kind of reciprocating it. This Jesus that came to them was not anywhere near what they expected or wanted or were seeking. So they were, now everybody's focused on physical except Christ. The disciples, they don't know what's going on either any more than the other people. All they know is they believe he's the Messiah, and they're just sticking with him because he's the God. But these other people have made that decision, so they look at it. It's kind of like when the Jews wanted to have their first king. And God says, well, okay, I'll give you a king. You know. And so who they gave him? They gave him Saul, because Saul was head and shoulders taller. He was a handsome guy. He was the kind of king you want. I want a king that's going to sit up on the throne and show this stuff and strut and do all this stuff. And Samuel says, you know what he's going to do? He's going to tax him to death. He's going to make everybody join the army. You want a king? We'll give you a king, so you can have a king. So then when God chooses his first king, he goes out and gets a shepherd boy. You know, they go through, and Samuel's going through all the sons. No, he's not it, he's not it, he's not it. He says, well, there's this one other guy, he's out taking care of the sheep. Well, the sheep, taking care of the sheep is a dirty job. You know, so go get him. You know, so God constantly does that. When he goes to the Samaritans, who does he send to talk to the Samaritans that were living at the high and throne place in Samaria? He sends Amos. Talk about a country bumpkin. Amos was the bottom of the bottom. And he sends him to talk to them. And they said, oh, you're such a nice guy. Why don't you go back home and leave us alone?
Yeah.
We don't want to hear from you. You're nothing. Well, Jesus comes the same way, born in a manger. I mean, how can't get lower than that?
Yep.
He's down there, and he shows up, and Isaiah said he had no form of comeliness that we should desire.
And he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, fully acquainted with grief, and we esteemed him not.
Yeah. And he spent all, you talked about his work, he was up late at night healing people. He was exhausted.
Oh, yeah,
You know, everything was on him.
it was. And that's where we're thankful for that he is able to accomplish that perfectly for us. With that in mind, one thing before we close with the Lord's Prayer. For those who weren't able to go, yesterday the family of Darlene Gans had a family gathering, but they gave me some cards to take home from there. So if you knew her, wanted to fill out a memory, they just really enjoyed collecting them. So I'll have that available up here if you wanted to take that, fill that out. But as we close, let us close together with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
The wrong one, yeah.
I figured you would probably get that thing. Mom was the other way.
Where did Dad go? Where did Dad go? There's your backpack. Did Dad go to the bathroom? I think Dad went to grab That's right.